panelists here in studio, Alp and Ali. And today, of course, is all matters about security. We shall be delving deeper and looking at what is happening in the region, of course, and what is happening also without the borders of Africa, that is in the world, what is happening in France right now, what is happening in the UK, what is happening also in America as well. Syria is a big also issue, and it shall be also on the table today. Good morning, guys. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Or I can serve you some water if you want to.
Actually, I think that would be helpful.
It will be helpful. It seems that you want some water or some... I've got coffee.
No,
I've got,
hot water would be sufficient.
Hot water.
Yes.
Good. In the meantime, then you can tell me what do you expect today, of course, to be pertinent issues that we should put on the table. Sudan is a big one, so to speak, right now.
Especially being in the neighborhood. To the current crisis unfolding, I think that is something we should keep a close eye on.
Okay.
Yeah, not to mention, Trump just vetoed a resolution to stop funding the war in Yemen,
All right.
among others.
Among others. Dr. Mumunzal?
Yes, there are a lot of human security concerns around, issues to do with the cholera outbreak here and there, issues of water shortage and so on, biting crisis here and there of water and all that. And of course a lot of issues in the regional and international scene, the change of guard, so to say.
All right.
In Sudan and so on.
All right, let's hear from Ambassador as well. As I try and fix Naomi Danvers' mic. Okay. You can continue.
Yeah, the issue of Sudan continues to be of a major worry to us here. And of course, as Muma said, the water is going to be a major crisis. You can see already the prediction that Nairobi is not going to be, is going to be face a crisis. And this is also going to be a regional issue in the long run. Plus, of course, we can see proxy wars in our neighborhood, which are quite worrying.
Proxy wars in our neighborhood, which is quite worrying. And of course, also on the table is about Egypt. Since Parliament has given a stamp of approval for extension of the president, while we see also other despots coming down.
Yes.
Let's hear from Naomi Danvers. Good morning.
Debarl, we have to continue keeping our eyes on corruption at home while watching all ranges of international issues, which includes, of course, South Sudan, Egypt, what's happening in America, and American role in the world.
Fantastic. Of course, so those are the topics of the day that we shall be discussing today here on AM Live. You know the drill, that you head to a Twitter handle, which is AM Live and TV. AM Live and TV is our profile name on Facebook, and 20686 is our SMS portal. And we shall be also looking at the abduction of the 2 Cuban doctors in Mandera, which focuses attention on security in the country. And on the surface, it raises questions about the safety of the Cuban doctors working in Kenya as well as other foreigners. But importantly, it is a statement of the general state of insecurity in the country. That much later in the course of the program. But as always, let me just begin from here with my Daily Nation, because my soft copy is corrupted a bit. But this is what is headlining the front page of the Daily Nation this morning. And it says, the big maize lie. This is a splash today. And on top there, the flag reads, meteorology, right? It's not rolling off my tongue easily this morning. I need to wake up. Meteorology Department warned yesterday that the long rains will fail. This is all about matters of food security. Lining up for the kill, it says the stage appears all set for profiteers to make a killing from a looming food crisis, as a war of words on whether the country has enough maize to feed itself erupts between government officials and entrepreneurs. The state insists the country has more than enough maize in its stores, but millers, crafty government bureaucrats, and some businessmen disagree, and thus unfolds a script through which shadowy figures mint billions every year. So this story is tucked away on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation today. And our panelists, I think also it's maybe good now that we peel back this particular story. What really happens when it comes to the maize in this country? Is it something that it is orchestrated by some people who, you know, have clammy fingers that they want actually to get from the public coffers with such, you know, instances where we have food insecurity? But this is a very, what should I say? I'm lacking that particular word. So to speak, I don't get the quite word, the one that I should actually use as a phrase this morning, but is it engineered purposely? Is someone particularly intent to make sure, yes, there is such a crisis in the country, and of course they know the long rains will be, you know, suppressed. We won't really have enough maize supply, but they take advantage of the situation to line up their pockets. Ambassador.
Not too long ago, we were looking at a situation where farmers were stuck with their crop, lining up with the National Cereals Board to supply, and they were told the stores are full. Just a few months later on, we're being assured there is enough food. We take them for their word because time will prove. But I bet you'll see in a few months somebody saying, what we have is not enough, and then they will be issuing tenders for people to bring in maize. And then, of course, this year we are not likely to have some good harvest. If you look at the rainfall pattern in Rift Valley, it is failed, which is the basket.
Yes.
And so we are actually facing a security crisis generated by food.
Generated by food, right. Let's hear from Momonzao on this as well.
Thank you, Debarl. One thing is important that we don't sound alarmist. Our country is stable. We have a government, a functional government. We have a strategic.
If you are facing a looming food crisis,
yes, but countries face problems every day. Just last year, the last 2 years, South Africa had a similar dry spell.
Which is true,
now,
but we cannot just be facing the same crisis every day.
That's right, but you see, you cannot. What you need to do is to plan for them and to be able to overcome them when they come. And that's one thing. So we don't want to be extremist in the context of being alarmist around the country, because that is not good for us in the first place. So of course we have a strategic grain reserve, for instance, which can accommodate up to 4 million bags of maize, and the government has reiterated that that is there. But probably, we go by in terms of forces of supply and demand. Now, sometimes when you have a strain, for example, and because of the exigencies of weather and climate and so on, then you have this problem we have had of middlemen. And this middleman problem is in many contexts affecting the entire supply chain. So it's about speculation and so on. So there could be a little bit of that kind of politics of the entire supply chain of grain.
In your own estimation,
yes,
we shouldn't be alarmist.
We should not be alarmist. We should.
You've seen people dying.
People, that can happen, Debarl. That is true. But you see, we don't want to paint a picture of a country that we cannot manage. We should be able to have things in place. For example, there are 13 or around about 14 counties that have been said to be under serious strain in terms of rain, shortage and water shortage and so on. And it is upon the line ministries involved and the county authorities involved to move in its speed and do what they're supposed to do. If it is about supplementary budgets for purposes of purchasing those grain, products and so on, and ferrying them to the people, that should be done. Lately, over the last 3 weeks and so on, we saw one of our local artists and other people coming together, politicians and so on, and leaders and community leaders, and a lot is being done. So we don't want to look like a country that is on its knees because of this. Yeah.
Yeah, Debarl, I'm less worried about the potential diminishing harvest for next year because of the delayed rains or lack of them thereof, as opposed to what is going on right now. I think the country has stock, and I would like to take government for the word on that. I think the challenge is not that there is no maize, for instance, or cereals. And anyone who comes from the North Reef, of course, know that we still have maize in our stores. So, we actually still have grain. Yeah. I think the trouble has been lack of structures and mechanisms to ensure that actually this gets to people who need it most, especially in certain places such as Turkana and the like. So going forward, it should have been a lesson that we need to have a mechanism both at the national and the local level or the county level to make sure that this starvation of famine is addressed appropriately, because you could be having lots of maize in silos in the North Rift, but then people right next door, they're actually dying because there's just no way of getting it. And that is just, sometimes it may speak to some incompetence within some bureaucrats, frankly speaking. And of course, that's something that can be addressed. But at this moment, I think we have sufficient grain. I'm more worried about next year, largely because of the lack of rainfall by this time of the year.
All right, Ambassador?
Food access, Debarl, has two major dimensions. One is the supply issue, that you can be able to reach it. And as Hassan has said, we have regional imbalance where some regions of the country could be having a stock, but while others, and so you have supply logistics challenges. That, to me, is a matter of efficiency and the rest. Then you have also the access in terms of pricing. Now, you have seen of late, the price has started going up. Yesterday, that was your lead story. And so it could also be there, but you cannot even buy it. So those are the two things you worry about. And why does that happen? It happens because of also supply. When the farmers feel that there is going to be a shortage, they might hold back, and so you see prices. And so I had the minister here say yesterday that he's looking at the price structure, and as the price continues to rise, he will be releasing to mirrors so that he can stabilize. I hope he does that. If he doesn't, then, as I said earlier on, time will tell.
Time will tell. All right, Naomi Dambo, finally.
Debarl, we voted for the Debarl government for the purpose of taking our public service to the ground, such that we can have early warning in terms of food security and all other strategic development of the country. The most important thing is we cannot continue this vicious cycle of every other year.
Yes.
We have a food crisis. Fundamental things like water supply and water management ought to be on top of every governor strategy and the central government. My colleagues here talk about food distribution. When you harvest so much mangoes, and most of it is rotten, and in other parts of the country, we need that. When you harvest so much maize in one part of the country, and the other part of the country is dying. All this happened because of poor planning, and we cannot excuse poor planning for a crisis. And therefore, we have to plan better.
Thank you.
The system has to be consistent from year to year.
From year to year. That you can find also this story on the front page of the Daily Nation this morning. And also on the side, but we have the housing levy, groups reject proposed tax. This is another story that you want to follow. Which camera am I on? On 7 or camera 3? There you have this story on page 6 of the Daily Nation today. Also, counties fail revenue test. Page 10, Treasury tells country officials attending the 4th Legislative Summit in Kisumu that annual tax in Kisumu, well, let me just repeat it. It says Treasury tells county officials attending the 4th Legislative Summit in Kisumu that annual tax collections have started to take a curious dip That is another story that you want to follow also on page 10 of the Daily Nation. Let's see what we have from other dailies. The Business Daily is on the touch screen, and this is what is on the front page of the touch screen this morning. SBM bags 3.82 billion shillings from Chase Bank buyout deal. And the transaction, the buyout of Chase Bank was concluded in August 2018 with Mauritian lender paying 471,335 as cash consideration. The story continues on page 4 of the Business Daily. Employers fight order to collect housing tax starting May. That is another story there that you want to follow on page 4 of the Business Daily. The employers have opposed plans by the government to begin deducting 1.5% housing levy from all workers beginning next month, citing a pending court case. This story continues on page 4 of the Business Daily. Tax roll locks pay of 5,000 for forestry workers is another story on page 4 of the Business Daily. KRA succession race holds up. The government has kicked off the search for a new Kenya Revenue Authority Commissioner General 2 months into the expiry of the extended term of outgoing boys. That is boss John Njiraini. On page 8 you can find this story. 2.5 billion shillings. This is a drop. Earnings from coffee fall by 2.5 billion shillings in March compared with the corresponding period in 2018. How Hyacinth sank Kisumu port is another story you can follow. And tax row locks payoff 5,000 forestry. I read that for you, but you have all the gritty details also on page 4 of the Business Daily today. Let's see what the Standard is holding for us. And this is what you're waking up to on the front page of the Standard. Well, it is corrupted as well. The Standard, I'll show you also the hard copy, but I have the Star for you as well. This is what is on the front page of the Star. No rainfall in April and May. That is according to the Met Department. So you have a warning there. No rainfall in April and May. Dry conditions to dominate most parts or most part of the country, leading to food and water scarcity. This story continues on page 2 of the Star. And also Huru's 1.5% house tax is unlawful. That is according to Federation of Kenya Employers. This story continues on page 4 and 5 of the Star this morning. Massive encroachment deters tourist attraction in Masai Mara. And call yourself Mr. Moneybags, not hustler. Joho tells DP Ruto is another story on page 25 of the Star this morning. Let's see what we have on the front page of the People Daily. And this is what you're waking up to. How top city hospital hid cholera. A disease commonly associated with downtrodden apparently crossed the red line to afflict Nairobi Hospital, a facility that takes pride as having top-notch material and human resources. You can follow this story on page 6 of the People Daily. And of course, it details for you how the deadly bacteria affects human being from 1 there up to 4. How it starts or how actually human being gets infected by cholera, and how also you can prevent cholera as well. Cholera prevention tips also are given here on the front page of the People Daily this morning. Let's see what we have on the front page of Taifa Leo. And this is what is on the front page of Taifa Leo. The splash. Maelfu hatarini kufutwa vyuo vikuu. Maelfu hatarini kufutwa vyuo vikuu. Vitivo, it says vitivo mbalimbali vya kosa wanafunzi baada ya watahiniwa wa KCSE kukosa kuchagua kozi kadhaa. That is another story that you can follow on page 2 of Taifa Leo this morning. Uhuru Raila wasusia kongamano la MCAs. That is what is happening in Kisumu right now with the Legislative Assembly. So you can follow the story on page 2 of Taifa Leo. Let's move on and see what is happening across the border, and we can see the Citizen is holding this particular splash for us. Food crisis looms, East Africa warned, and it says the situation is likely to be critical in the next 6 months. National Assembly Speaker Job Ndugai told a regional meeting in Arusha. That is a story that you can follow on page 2 of the Citizen as well. We have a bite from Mr. Ndugai saying we are seeing less and less rains this year, and this signals an imminent famine. That is a story that you want to follow on page 2 of the Citizen. This also is happening in Tanzania. So you can get all the gritty details, and you can see also a related picture there. This is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations representative in Tanzania, Fred Kafero, addressing a news conference in Arusha yesterday after the opening of the first annual general meeting of the Eastern Africa Parliamentary Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition. You can follow this story, as I've mentioned, on page 2 of the Citizen. Stage set for biometric SIM registration. Also, this is happening in Tanzania. You can follow the story on page 2. And the rise and fall of Oscar Kambona, a story in Political Platform. You can follow this magazine inside the Citizen as well. Zanzibar set for bigger regional affairs role is another story that continues on page 2 of the Citizen. Still there, Mwananchi is up, and this is a splash today. Zanzibar sasa kushiriki masuala ya kimataifa. That is a splash, and this is how it looks, if you may care to grab a copy of Mwananchi as well. Let's see what the Daily Monitor in Uganda is holding for us, and this is your splash today. Well, it's gone back to Mwananchi, but this is how it looks. Government offers asylum to Sudan's al-Bashir. Implication? Asylum could send Uganda on a fragile path with the international community, as al-Bashir is indicted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And you can see a related picture there. This is President Museveni welcoming former Sudan President Omar al-Bashir at State House in Entebbe on July the 7th. This is a file picture 2018 for peace talks between South Sudan, President Salva Kiir, and rebel leader Riek Machar. The government of Uganda says it will give General Bashir asylum if he asks for it. And this is what is on the front page of the Daily Monitor. Remember, we shall be discussing also the political situation in Sudan right now. And also, this is a new development as well. What does it also portend for Uganda if they give asylum to Bashir, who is wanted by the International Criminal Court? All the gritty details on page 4 of the Daily Monitor. Masaka gangster killed by colleagues. That is what ISO is saying here, and you can follow the story on page 7 of the Daily Monitor in Uganda. In Rwanda, we have the New Times, and this is a splash today. Will new reforms cut the red tape in construction? That is the question, and you can follow the story also on page 2 of the New Times in Rwanda. Catholic Church slammed for fake apology over convicts. It's all about convicts plea. It's all about the genocide. Rwanda commemorating 25 years since genocide happened in 1994. And we can see mourners here during a commemoration event at Ntarama Genocide Memorial. Yes, in 2017, thousands of people were killed at this former Catholic church during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis. You can follow the story on page 4 of the New Times in Rwanda. Why Uganda cement imports? Why Ugandan cement imports were sent back. Find out why they were actually sent back, and you can follow the story on page 8 of the New Times in Rwanda. I want to show you also what we do have on the front page of the East African this week. Very important, because also this will be our discussion this morning with our panelist. Let me try and lift that quickly for you so that you can see what it is holding for us. It's all about also Bashir, and this is the East African this week. Bashir exit. Will Sudan end up as another Egypt? Right? His deposition by the military has not calmed the protesters who remain in the streets defying a curfew order. You have the story also on page 4 and 6 and 17 as well of the East African. Pop kisses Kiir Machar feet. Disagree in private but hold hands in public. Pontiff urges the Sudan or the South Sudan leaders. And you have that story tucked away on page 12 also of the East African this week. So make sure you grab a copy of this as well. And we shall be discussing this also with our panelists. Let me show you the editorial cartoons that we do have today. This is in the Daily Nation, according to Victor. I'll try and grab that quickly for you. Let's begin with the Standard. This is what we have. Stop violence against women. And of course, the spate of violence against women now is skyrocketing, and this is what Gado has drawn this morning in the Standard. Let's see also what we do have inside the People Daily according to Stano. And this is what is drawn for us today. Fill it up. It's all about taxes. Now you have the housing fund that is drawing a lot of flack. We have the pay as you earn, you have NSSF, you have NHIF, we have oxygen tax, according to him, other taxes, VAT and all that jazz. And this is what the small rat is saying. Is this tax all robbery? The other taxes as well. So Kenyans are actually feeling it. They're digging deeper into your pockets. Right now is the housing fund as well. We shall also be discussing this. What does it really mean for you Kenyans this morning? That is according to Stano there. I shall pick up Victor's editorial cartoon much later in the course of the program and show you. But for now, you can grab a copy of the Daily Nation, the copy of the Standard, as I always say, whichever paper that really floats your boat. But for now, let's see what we have in the highlights. Housing Kenya. We give you the gritty details about the housing levy. Country that is Sudan, protest takes a musical turn for rights. And Parliament backs measures that could extend Sisi's term in Egypt. Now, the Federation of Kenya Employers has strongly opposed the government's directive to deduct 1.5% of employees' salaries as housing levy, terming it as a premature move that disregards court orders. FKE Executive Director Jacqueline Mugo has urged employers countrywide not to implement the policy as directed by the Housing Ministry and the Kenya Revenue Authority, as it reveals that the government is not ready to engage with employers.
There is a court order. The government cannot do that. They wait until the consent, if there is any, is adopted by the court. Even if you have filed it, but it has not been adopted, it means the court order still subsists. Until the day, say, the consent is hereby registered and adopted as an order of the court. There are people who stay in Rwanda. They are paying mortgage or mortgages they have taken for their homes. They are not interested in the housing levy that the government is going to give them house. But even if you have to give them, what type of house are you going to construct for them?
Make sure you grab a copy of the Business Daily for this. Employers fight orders to collect housing tax starting May. You have this as a sidebar story there on the front page of the Business Daily. And as I'd shown you earlier, this is also a sidebar story on the front page of the Star as well. Uhuru's 1.5 tax, or Uhuru's 1.5 house tax is unlawful according to the Federation of Kenya Employers. This story is tucked away on page 4 and 5 of the Star as well. And also the Daily Nation has that. I don't have my soft copy with me right now, but also is a sidebar story on the front page of the Daily Nation as well. Now, the directive that is expected to see salaried workers dig deeper into their pockets to finance the government's housing agenda has elicited strong reactions from Kenyans, while others question why they were not involved in its development. Others are concerned about how it will work, who is it set to benefit, and the strategies put in place to ensure the monies are not misappropriated. NTV's Sharon Barang has more on this.
Right now, people are going through a lot of hardship. You saw farmers the other day, they were being told no manure. The other day, it was milk. Now again, people are being levied, and this levy, you don't know where it's going or how it affects us. If the government wants to provide housing, it should be able to do it on its own and then sell the houses to the people.
At the end of the day, am I going to get a house when I'm done, or is my salary just going to be taken without me getting an actual house?
To me, I think it's a saving on my side, because it also helped me to save towards the retirement, because they have given an option that you can, it will be directed to retirement benefit or you can recoup it in cash at the expiry of your employment.
If I start contributing next month, there is no guarantee that I'll get the house.
For somebody who is taxed 3 times, it is too much. It is too much.
Due process has not been followed. Yeah, there has not been any public participation. This tax has been levied on Kenyans without proper information. They're not aware. They don't have consent.
They just hold and then they come up with the strategies and tell how are we going to benefit. Because I'm sure it's not every Kenyan who will benefit from this housing.
Tukikatwa sisi wote wale wako na manyumba na wale sasa wanaanza harakati za ku-own nyumba, itakuwa ni kama iko unfair kwa wale ambao already wako na manyumba. So serikali inafaa kuangalia vile inaweza kuwa fair tu wale wako na manyumba na wale hawana.
Now let's listen from Sharon Baranga's story. All right. We'll try and get that story for you. The Homa Bay County government is said to have paid a non-researchers 55 million shillings to conduct research studies whose purpose and findings were not known or made public. The county, which is among the 18 whose governors have been summoned by the Senate Public Accounts Committee, also paid out millions for the hire of pro-box cars. NTV's Silas Apollo reports.
In the annual report on expenditures in counties, Auditor General Edward Ouko says that most of the devolved units either fail to account for public resources or spend them for purposes which they were not intended. A case in point is the Homa Bay County government, which for the umpteenth time is on the spot. This time for paying unknown researchers 55 million shillings to conduct research work whose findings remain a mystery. Ouko says that the county in the 2017-2018 financial year commissioned the research but failed to provide supporting documentary evidence to confirm the projects which necessitated the research studies. Homa Bay County is among the 18 devolved units whose governors have been summoned by the Senate's Public Accounts Committee, chaired by Homa Bay Senator Moses Kajwang. Other counties whose governors are set to appear before the committee on various dates beginning next week include Kisii, Nairobi, Migori, Kiambu, Taita Taveta, Lamu and Murang'a. Also in the list are Mombasa, Turkana, Kirinyaga, West Pokot, Tana River, Meru, Embu and Isiolo counties. Governor Cyprian Awiti of Homa Bay is also said to have hired pro-box cars at a cost of 6.3 million shillings, but failed to indicate the reasons why he hired the cars. His Kisii counterpart James Ongwai is on the spot for, among other things, paying 12.6 million shillings to gather views from members of the public on how the county was being run. There was, however, no feedback on the outcome of the said public participation forums.
All the measures
The Senate committee is keen on getting answers from the governors on why they failed to use the funds as had been intended, while at the same time find answers on whereabouts of some of the missing billions.
The audit questions come in the backdrop of an increasing public outrage and criticism against governors who time and time again have been accused of misusing public funds at the expense of development in the counties.
Kirinyaga Governor Anne Waiguru, for instance, is expected to give reasons why the county paid out some 10 million shillings to the Council of Governors, which it says was subscription fee. Yet the council, according to the report, is an autonomous entity with its own budget. Nairobi Governor Mike Sonko is on the spot for using 18 million shillings to plant grass within the Central Business District, despite earlier claims that the funds used in the project were his own. Silas Apollo, NTV.
Now, demonstrators scuffled with security forces in Algiers as the head of the army warned time is running out after weeks of anti-government protest. Thousands of demonstrators marched through the streets of Algiers and in cities across the country, calling for radical change in the 8th week of mass protests. Lieutenant General Ahmed Gaed Salah's remarks were the strongest indication yet that the military, which has said it supports a transition period after the April the 2nd resignation of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, is losing patience. Earlier on Tuesday, the chairman of Algiers Constitutional Council, Tayyib Baleiz, quit his post, according to state news agency APS. That followed calls for his resignation by protesters who say he's part of a ruling elite they want abolished. But the flicker's departure failed to placate many Algerians who want to topple the old guard and its associates. Now, also fighters of the eastern-based Libyan National Army, LNA, fired heavy weaponry, including tanks and guns mounted on armored vehicles, as the forces of veteran General Khalifa Haftar battled groups loyal to the internationally recognized government in the southern outskirts of Tripoli. Now, the latest flare-up began almost 2 weeks ago when Eastern Libyan commander Khalifa Haftar's Libyan National Army advanced on the country's capital. Haftar's forces predicted victory within days. But Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj's internationally recognized government has managed to bog them down in southern suburbs with help from armed groups from various western Libyan factions. Foreign powers are worried but unable to present a united front over the latest flare-up in the cycle of anarchy gripping Libya since dictator Muammar Gaddafi was toppled in 2011. The conflict has brought a growing humanitarian toll: 174 people. That is also 756 injured and almost 20,000 displaced, according to the latest United Nations tallies, and sank for now an international peace plan. And Egypt's parliament has approved amendments to the constitution that could keep President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in power until 2030, though they still have to be endorsed in a referendum to take effect. That will be given much later. The changes will extend Sisi's current term to 6 years from 4, and then allow him to run again for a third term, which will last 6 years. The amendments will also bolster the role of the military in political life and increase the president's power over the judiciary. Critics of the changes say this. The 596-member parliament, which is dominated by Sisi supporters, voted 531 to 22 in favor of the amendments. A date for the referendum has not yet been confirmed, but Cairo is full of banners encouraging Egyptians to participate. Sisi's supporters say the changes are necessary to give him more time to complete major development projects and economic reforms. His critics say they concentrate more powers in the hands of a leader accused of rights groups of presiding over a relentless crackdown on freedoms. Voting in Indonesia's presidential and parliamentary polls was underway in the east of the country early on today, the start of the world's biggest single-day election. More than 192 million Indonesians are eligible to vote in presidential and parliamentary elections, with 245,000 candidates vying for votes in what is described as the world's biggest single-day election. President Joko Widodo, a former furniture salesman who launched his political career as a small city mayor, is standing for re-election in a contest with ex-General Prabowo Subianto, whom he narrowly defeated in 2014. Polling stations opened at 7 a.m. Local time. In the east, nationwide poll will close at 1 p.m. local time. Now, bells at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana tolled 50 times as a show of solidarity on Tuesday, a day after a fire tore through the similarly named cathedral in Paris. University officials decided to toll the bells 50 times. On matter security, and the abduction of 2 Cuban doctors in Mandera focuses attention on security in the country. On the surface, it raises questions about the safety of the Cuban doctors working in Kenya, as well as other foreigners. But importantly, it is a statement of the general state of insecurity. It is too early to pinpoint the perpetrators, even though police suspect Al-Shabaab terrorists. Whoever they are and whatever tag they wear, they are criminals who must be dealt with. Abduction of foreign nationals has serious implications as it dents the image of the country and serves or also severs relationships, which is the impact the abductors and their collaborators sought to achieve. Kenya had pledged to provide security and ensure well-being of the Cuban doctors who had been brought in to ease their burden of staff shortage in medical institutions across the country. For good measure, the 110 doctors are generally well taken care of, a fact that has elicited resentment from local doctors who have argued that the preferential treatment amounts to discrimination. The local doctors have also wondered why Kenyan doctors sent to Cuba have not been accorded similar privileges. But those are subsidiary issues. The key issue is the safety of professionals working everywhere in the country, irrespective of their nationality. Mandera, other northern counties and parts of the coast have suffered seriously due to insecurity and especially terror attacks. Due to proximity to Somalia, a country that has not had an organized government for more than 2 decades, criminals roam across the border and vanish after committing their nefarious acts. We want to discuss this with our panelists this morning, that also and a raft of other issues as well across the region. As I've mentioned earlier, or had mentioned earlier, Sudan also is big on the agenda, this particular reprisal that now we can see also. Uganda is opening arms to welcome al-Bashir if he will seek asylum in that country. But what does that portend also for Uganda as far as the international politics is concerned, where we know that he is actually indicted by the ICC for war crimes or crimes against humanity. Allow me to introduce our panelists who are here. We had done that early in the day, and that is, we'd introduce to you Dr. Hassan Khanenje, who is the director at the Horn Institute. We have also Dr. Momo Nzao, who is a governance and security expert. We have also, this is Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, who is the chairman of African Capacity Building Foundation, and also the chairman of Trademark East Africa and the former deputy chair of the African Union. We have also the vice chancellor of KC University and also an expert on foreign policy and defense. This is Noah Midamba. I can see also a regret here from Dr. Tusain Muruhula, who's saying actually he slept through his alarm this morning, so he cannot be able to make it. But nonetheless, we continue the conversation this morning. Gentlemen, let's first deal with what is on the front page of the dailies before we go to the Cuban doctors, the housing levy. I just want to hear from you as well. And what has been drawn also here by Stano today. Taxes, 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 taxes. We're having the housing levy tax, which is meant to be taking effect, I think, the end of this month. But now we have protest from, you know, the Federation of Kenya Employers and other agencies as well. What is your reaction to this particular housing levy? I know this is not security, but of course, if it is going deeper, digging into our pockets as well, it might be a matter of we don't have enough, so uprising will be there. This is what has happened. I'm not saying that uprising will be there in the country because of this, but of course we can see from other countries like Sudan, it has been the cost of living that has skyrocketed and people are tired. Dr. Khanenje.
Yeah, perhaps is an aspect of human security at the same time, because you know, you cannot expect a population that's living on the streets to be happy and be productive at the extent to which they should be. Now, I think the philosophy behind being able to afford every Kenyan a decent housing, it is good. And we should be moving in that direction, that we have policies in place so that not just a few people live actually in houses that are worth being called houses, but at least the majority of Kenyans who fall below, a lot of them are, you know, fall below the poverty line, but also a significant majority can't really afford mortgage. They cannot afford to build a permanent house, that we are able to provide that. You know, having said that, I think, government then has a responsibility to explain to Kenyans why they should be taxed on something perhaps they do not know. It's a little bit disheartening, especially when every day they are hearing about scandals and people literally looting billions in sacks and stuff like that. On top of course, if you make a certain amount of money, the tax sometimes goes up to 30%, and that does not include other expenses you're having. To add to that, I think is going to take some very good reason and explanation why that is going to happen. Of course, you can say it's 1.5%, but it's significant because most Kenyans, they don't make a lot of money. And perhaps that 1.5% is what they've budgeted for the electricity at the end of the month. So that is taking it away. But I think if in the crafting of this policy, the public is involved, but also you do it in such a way that, for instance, how about people who are not going to get those houses? How about, as someone said, people who are already paying mortgage for their own houses and therefore they will not really need to use that? Or how about people who are not interested? How do you go about that? We need to find a better way of selling this idea to Kenyans, or a better way of actually collecting money to put up housing, or perhaps find a better way of attracting foreign or local investment actually in the real estate in a way that can be affordable and accessible by many Kenyans. But I think to wake up and implement a policy, especially when the public doesn't understand, of course we know today how rather policy should be made in Kenya, or even how laws. Public participation is required, and if you want Kenyans to take ownership, it's going to be important to explain exactly why you're doing that and how they're going to benefit from it, and let them find a way of actually buying into it, but also make sure that those people who do not want to do that, there is a way in which, for instance, they can be able to get that money back. And if they cannot afford because they're already committed, then what mechanism should be there? There should be certain exceptions so that not everybody is punished for something perhaps they don't really believe in.
Right, Erasmus Muncha.
I think Hassan has done justice to the discussion, but I want to step back and look at the big picture, because if you look at page 6, where this story is of the nation, it is also together with a cartoon, which I must say my mind this morning has not been imaginative enough to interpret it well. But all that said, I think the big picture here is, this story here says, borrow locally to fund infrastructure, a meeting that is going on at Windsor. And I think if you look at Africa, rather than us borrowing money from outside to come and develop our infrastructure, housing is in that category, it is important for us to raise local revenue. And there are two ways. It is either taxation or direct contribution to specific sectors. There is an import levy now which is meant for infrastructure. This is a direct for housing. And if you look at history, for instance, in the case of Korea, how Korea was able to transit from a poor country like Kenya was the same time in the 60s, is because they developed their domestic resource and improved on the savings. So the big picture is quite okay. I think, as Hassan has said, what has happened following our constitution, which is quite extensive in allowing public participation, is again where we may be failing. I am surprised to see, and I don't know whether the lawyers are talking with both sides of their mouth, they seem to be, the government seems to be saying they have reached an accord that employers can deduct it. The employers are saying, yeah, we may have reached it, but it hasn't been registered, which means to me it's a process rather than the context. I think this is then something that the government should move in, make sure that there is total understanding of the employers, because employers speak on behalf of workers and that they are on board. But I think what Hassan is alluding to, the 1.5% incidence on tax is not that big a dent on one payroll, if you look at the amount, but the symbolism. And I think the Kenyans are really worried about how the funds will be applied. What is the equity part of it? Some are saying already contributing to a house which have already purchased their mortgage. Why should I contribute if nobody's going to subsidize that? I think these details need to be worked out, because out of the 5 people interviewed there by the Nation, I was amazed. Only one spoke positively. If it was indeed a random sampling, then it tells you something is not clear. There's lack of understanding, lack of support. So government must go back to the drawing board and make sure that they bring on board, there is concession and there is participation and the clear mechanism clearly understood. But of course then ring-fence it, because any corruption on this, because people will identify their contribution to it, will be a major blow to the government.
But if you say that 1.5% is such a small dent, I think some other people will really take special umbrage, because it depends with what brackets within the taxation you are in, actually.
It's a progressive tax, from what I mean levy, from what I can see, the figures that are there, meaning significantly in terms of the pay take home, 1.5 is not huge. But then, of course, what I said is the symbolism of it is more important than the actual instant tax.
Right. Let's hear from Professor Noah Midamba.
Debarl, in America, what's called American dream is for one to have a house. In Scandinavia, people are taxed very heavily, but every single person has a house. In Southeast Asia, they are planned meticulously for the zoning, where almost every single person has a house, a decent house. So the point here, Debarl, is for a dream for every Kenyan to have a decent house. There is no question about it. The issue is the process, how this is done. You cannot say 1.5 levy on tax is small, because it is tax, and every tax has to be explained to every citizen. So the point is, we need to be able to set a very clear goal. We need to be able to communicate that goal to every single Kenyan, to have people rally behind it, such that we move toward it as a country and as a citizen of this country, committed to making a common good. I don't mind taking 1.5 out of my salary to know that someone else in the country is going to benefit. And I think more and more Kenya will be convinced to do that. But just to impose a tax and say we are going to do it, and then somebody will hijack it and start creating concrete jungle instead of a decent house, will be unacceptable to me and to most Kenyans.
Dr. Mumunzau.
Yes, thank you, Debarl. I am in concurrence with my fellow panelists on this one, and there is something in economics they call the collective action problem. When you have 10 people, 20 people, 30 people to do a task, you might find about 25 think that 5 strong ones will do the task, and they will sort of free ride, what we call the free rider problem. And you know, public goods, Debarl, are always in short supply because of the collective action problem. You find in neighborhoods where you have good houses, but the roads are bad because nobody cares about the road, because it's everybody's problem and therefore nobody's problem at the end of the day. And therefore we need, just from what Professor Midamba said, we must love our country a little bit more. We must love our communities a little bit more.
Yes.
And it starts with some degree of convincing so that you can overcome the collective action problem. Because the Big Four agenda is something fantastic, something good. This is the direction that other countries have taken in the context of social safety nets, social protection, and making sure that people have it. In the United States, where Professor Midamba was talking about, you have places they used to call the projects. Places like Debarl, the Bronx, and you know, down there in Staten Island, and those places, they have those that they used to call project houses. They're well done. they are not everybody's liking, but people grew up in those project houses and they're still there. I've seen them. And they're well maintained and planned for. And that kind of thinking is what Big Four agenda and other countries in Southeast Asia are doing and so on, to make sure that everyone has shelter.
Thank you.
It's a human right. And therefore it's important that we support it, but let people get information that is clear how to go about it and so on. And I think people will be there. Let's love our country a little bit more.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We want to take a short break right now. And of course, on that topic about housing levy, we shall discuss it, I should say, tomorrow in our program In the Market, to try and peel back what are the facts, what are the fictions about it, what is the misunderstanding, so that now we can get clarity on it, and what is the way forward. Have we crossed the Rubicon? Is the Federation of Kenya coming in late in the day when we're just about to implement this? Where were these voices before? Those are questions that we need to put on the table as well. So you can also join us tomorrow for that. But we want to take a short break right now. When we circle back, we try and see what also was on the front page of the Sunday Nation, looking at that inside Al-Shabaab. Is this a resurgence? Is this another new tactic? We can see the abduction that is happening right now. Previously, we had also an Italian lady who, up to now, we don't know how, whereabouts, that was captured by Al-Shabaab. And now we have the Cuban doctors as well. What does this portend for the security of professionals, as we'd earlier asked in our intro? Don't go away. And I've created FaceTime this morning with Professor Naomi Damba, who is Vice Chancellor of KC University, also an expert on foreign policy and defense. Erastus Moncha, the Chairman of African Building Capacity, also the Chairman of Trademark East Africa, and the former Deputy Chair of the African Union. Also, we have with us Dr. Mumo Nzao, who is a governance and security strategist, and also we do have with us as well Dr. Hassan Khanenje, who is the Director at the Horn Institute. Let's just now focus on the Cuban doctor's abduction so far, and what this really portends as far as security is concerned. Earlier on, we'd seen them, they had expressed, some reservations about being posted to Mandera and the northern part of the country after reading from the internet, the spate of abductions and the spate of also terrorist attacks within these particular areas. So did the fears, come to pass, Dr. Hassan Khanenje?
I think the recent kidnap of Cuban doctors underscores the continuing threat that we face from Al-Shabaab and its other affiliates within Somalia, and frankly, some of perhaps the sleeper cells within the country. And perhaps instead of beefing up security for members of parliament, who in most cases they live in relative safety in good places in Nairobi or in the countryside, when we have our professionals such as doctors, whether they're foreign or local, we should be able to accord them security they deserve for them to be able to do the work. Places such as Mandera, it's a hardship area. Not a lot of people, including Kenyans themselves, actually want to go and work there, but it's also dangerous, and that is why there's a lot of reluctance for people to want to be posted in a place like that. And because of that, security, when it comes to making sure that they're actually safe, think we should do more as a country. But this incident also speaks to something else. The space and means to make money for Al-Shabaab has been declining, has been dwindling, has been reducing. And kidnapping has been a strategy to actually get ransom to stay afloat. But also, any time, like you heard recently, I think the Americans took out one of the top ISIL people, and previously they've been able to take out some camps, some training camps, and groups of Al-Shabaab. This can also be an attempt for them to show they're still relevant, because they know when they kidnap Cuban doctors, they're going to make news that they're still out there. And what we need to do as a country is to stay vigilant, but also to ensure that we provide enough protection for people who are working those places and for citizens who are working those places. Now, these people and the sleeper cells within those places actually exist, and sometimes communities know about them. And that is where, when it comes to, especially the relationship between the security services and the communities, should be strengthened. It should be a deliberate effort, not coincidental, and it should not happen just after an incident or has taken place, such as that one. We should be able to build enough trust so we get intelligence required. But at the same time, we shouldn't be exposing these people and make them easy targets, because if they were being driven by a driver and they didn't have any protection and they're working in a place such as Mandera or even some places in some border regions, they become easy targets. And Al-Shabaab would like to make money. Al-Shabaab would like to know that, to demonstrate the world that's still relevant. Al-Shabaab would still like to hurt Kenya because we're not exactly the best friends. And so vigilance and security is something that we should really emphasize, but also try to redeploy some of our services from places where they're less needed and individuals who want security. And I had this debate go on, including on this panel, or rather yesterday. And I just want to remind people that out of I think about 535 congressmen in the United States, only about 9 of them actually have protection. About 9. So you think about that. But here I understand even speakers of county assemblies have security. It is ridiculous. We should put our security services, deploy security services where they actually need it, in places such as Mandera, and protect the type of people who are actually doing some real good work for Kenya, such as doctors and physicians. Of course, we understand there's some noise about how they're being treated vis-a-vis how their Kenyan counterparts are being paid in terms of compensation. But it's also important to understand that this was a government-to-government agreement, and expatriates are rarely paid the same as Kenyans. Of course, we would like our own doctors also to be paid better, but I don't think that should be a reason for us to actually start making a lot of noise, especially when it comes, Cuban doctors are known the world over to be extremely qualified. In terms of per capita, is probably one of the highest, in the world in terms of Cuba. And our doctors who are going to Cuba mostly are students. They're going to try and learn certain things. These guys are coming here to practice. So, and given the type of environment sometimes are being posted, you want to be able to maintain them, but also perhaps what the government should do, find a way of making sure that our interns are also attached to them, so they can get a lot more practical skills, so that in case or at the point when these doctors decide to come back, at least we have something left behind, and not just come and, of course, we pay them quite a bit of money, then they go back to their home country. But what I'm seeing right now is an attempt by Al-Shabaab to show relevance, to raise money, but also a failure in us making sure we protect the people who actually need protection.
Right, so to raise money through ransom, that is what they're seeking. It's not really to get back at Kenya.
Yeah.
Yeah, why would they go for the Cuban doctors if not really for the ransom? Is that the case?
Yeah, for the ransom, because number one, when kidnapping Cuban doctors, for them being international, since they're not Kenyans, is going to make bigger news. Okay, there's going to be a lot bigger effort by the Kenyan government generally, or at least that is the thinking, to be able to get those doctors, because you do not want to spoil your reputation. And so the calculation is, by getting this, chances are may extract a lot more money than, for instance, a kidnapping Dr. Njuguna, who sometimes perhaps people may not really be paying enough attention to, or may not even make news.
Right. Ambassador Erastus Manches, in terms of diplomacy, where does this also put Kenya? Because all the Cubans were expecting that, the country will offer tight security for the doctors as well. But now it seems something somewhere or somebody somewhere dropped the ball.
Debarl, first of all, I think our thoughts and really best wishes go to the doctors, their families, and the government of Cuba. And of course in Kenya, the security personnel that was killed, and also to the people of, who have been directly affected. Debarl, I think in terms of the diplomacy, first of all, I like to say this project is a noble one, that Kenya is trying to take into account best practices from Cuba. I've had the privilege of visiting Cuba, and one of the things I was exposed to when I was at AU was really their medical condition. And even at AU, we started a program of cooperation with Cuba, in spite of the fact that Cuba is not a well-off country. One of the things they have been able to export to the world is their medical services, not just to Kenya. And having said that, I'm not sure that you can say the government didn't do enough to protect those doctors. If you look at the incident as it happened, there were two APs with the doctors who seem to have been overcome by this well-planned and well-coordinated activity. I think what Hassan has alluded to is very important, because it means it is not the physical presence of security that matters. And this is a message to our leaders who really like to hang around with those big security around them. But it's a question of how you can gather your intelligence and how you can use them. I think the question here is that, and I think Hassan has said it well, that the Al-Shabaab is looking for visibility, high targets. In this case, is by value, which means they can extort a lot of money, but also make a point, because then it will also be sending a message to Kenya and all that. And I don't think we should succumb to this. This is the reason why Kenya went to Somalia in the first place and the rest. But it means we have a big job to do in our hand, because this is going to send signal to the rest of the world, because this is big news all over, like the case of the Italian lady. And it has impact in many other sectors, tourism and the rest. And I think we should really do the best. I've seen Somali elders have moved in to try and rescue the doctors. This is good effort. But in terms of the question, diplomacy, I don't think it's going to be a negative to Kenya. The question is, Kenya did everything possible to secure them, but this is an issue that you cannot manage. In fact, as somebody was saying here the other day, these abductions occur in many other parts of the world every day. It's not, but it's only that this high value. That's why we're talking about it.
Right. Dr. Momo.
Thank you. One thing we need to be careful as an expert, I know that when you have a live issue like this one, you may say a few things that may interfere with the operational nuances involved and tactical nuances involved. We have our cooperating governments for a good reason. Al-Shabaab cannot defeat the will of cooperating governments for good reasons, such as having doctors exchanging medics. The mission they want to achieve by trying to make a point, they have not made any point because they are doing it against the goodwill of people. Governor Ali Roba said, we want our doctors back. These people are treating patients from Somalia, from Ethiopia, and all over the place. And therefore, they have not done anything that is meaningful at all. They want governments to go through sunk costs and reputation costs. They are trying to signal resolve and so on. But it has not worked for Boko Haram in Kaduna, in the abductions that have taken place in Zaria, and those kinds of kidnappings by Ansar Din, Ansar Sharia, Jihadiyya Salafiyya and those other groups. They have not worked for them. Al-Murabtun, they have not worked for them. And therefore, this is a blind shot, a blind target, and it is a blind pass that will not help them achieve much. But at this point, we believe that our security agencies and our cooperating governments are going to be able to put this issue under control, and therefore we should refrain from any kind of speculative talk at this point in time to ensure that everything that needs to be done is done right, so that we prosecute this duty in a succinct and accurate manner, without any collateral damage or anything like that. So at this point, I won't say much about it, but Al-Shabaab has been degraded, just like ISIS. They're trying to fight back. But the will of the international community cannot be defeated.
Right. Finally, Professor Nomi Damo on this.
Debarl, apart from my colleague's contribution, there are three things I want to say about this. Number one, we must remember the first reason we went to Somalia was to secure our border and protect the people of Kenya. We must continue full force with the idea of using smart security system on the border, including building walls in some places and using smart system to completely know who is coming in and who is going out of Kenya through the Somalia border. Secondly, Al-Shabaab continue to evolve. The war is not over. The war is not won. Yes, they are degraded, but they continuously figuring out the next step and watching very closely how we react. The point that is taken this long, that the kidnappers has disappeared and the culprit has not been brought to justice, demonstrate that we are not there yet to deal with these people. This war, again, is going to be won on intelligence. And the relationship between the local people in the border and also the security must continue to strengthen so that we know intelligent who is in, what they do on a day-to-day basis. We must make sure that every Kenyan is registered. That is a very, very important development, such that we have enough information about the movement of the citizen and what happened.
Mm-hmm. Right, thank you. Right, we want also to drill deeper now on what is happening across the region, beginning with South Sudan. And we have a very important today editorial cartoon here by Victor. Now that Sudan is actually seen, Bashir, who was a despot, so to speak, is out of office. The military is willing to meet Sudan civilians and discuss a handover of power. And I can also show you what is on the front page also of the East African this week. Make sure you grab a copy. There's a good probing question there about Bashir as well, as far as the exit is concerned. And the probing question is, will Sudan end up as another Egypt? Right? His deposition by the military has not calmed the protesters who remain in the streets defying a curfew order. You have this story tucked on page 4 and 6 and 17 of East African. And we've seen also in Algeria, Bouteflika is normal, but still the protests are still ongoing, right? So there's always this question about having a benevolent dictator for the stability of the country, or ousting him out, and then we have a situation like Libya, we have a situation like what is happening in Egypt right now, and now Sudan is on the table as well. So let's just discuss this particular situation in Sudan and what does it portend for the region as far as security is concerned. Dr. Hassan Khanenje.
Debarl, a time comes when you know it's about time, and you need to know when to leave as a leader. We were discussing not too long ago about the potential difficulties that Sudan is likely to face in the wake of increasing protests. Now, the military council, I think one thing they underestimated is the people's desire to actually have a civilian government. Now, when I see democracy in this cartoon, I'm not so sure it's so much about democracy as seeing a different face that is not military. You know, democracy is not something, I know Western media especially, they like throwing things out there, you know, every time they protest, they say fighting for democracy. How many people actually know what democracy is and how democracy works? But deep down inside, human beings want to be free. They want to be able to make certain choices on their own. And now the idea of benevolent dictator might be good only for a certain time, because it may provide what I call a false sense of stability. In authoritarian regimes, and such as the one that just collapsed in Sudan, is they tend to literally kill institutions. They destroy any form of alternative government. And so in their absence, they leave a massive vacuum to be filled. Today, had Sudan allowed, let's say, political opposition to grow and thrive and build some internal institutions, it would be much easier for the military to actually hand over to someone. Today, they don't seem to know what to do. Now, the transitional period by the military council that was provided of 2 years, of course, was too long. And not to mention the state of emergency and stuff like that. I don't think Sudanese are ready to actually wait for that long, especially in the wake of high inflation, you know, increasing cost of living, and so many other issues that Sudan has been facing ever since, of course, you had the secession of South Sudan, then all the wars in the east and the west, and of course then the outbreak of the civil war in Sudan that also denied it lots of revenue, especially for Bashir in conducting the patron-client politics that most, of course, African leaders had perfected for a very long time. And if the military council is reading the mood of the people, they will need to move with speed and get someone who either is a civilian or if he's a military, at least has credibility to be civilian or to allow for that to happen. Because outside that, I'm afraid in 2 days, Friday, especially being the day that most Muslims, you know, go for Juma prayers, things may start exploding around that time. And so the time frame has to be shortened. I think the African Union has come out strongly in giving the military council 15 days to make sure that happens. I think Ambassador Mwenche may speak a little bit more on that. And my assessment is if they don't do that, Sudan may descend into chaos. So the sooner they do it, the better for Sudan and the better for the region.
Right. Woman's
Thank you, Debarl. What is going on in Republic of Sudan is a contentious action, contentious politics on the part of a good chunk of the population. It is part and parcel of things that happen when it comes to political transitions of any kind. It may not be a democratic, transition in its best, but there's political change taking place in every place you go. In 1968, there's a scholar called Samuel Huntington who wrote a book called Social Order and Change in Society. And it is an interesting book where he says that idea of benevolent dictator and all that, though he didn't use those words, but the idea is that a corrupted, a less democratic political system sometimes can enforce order in ways that even more liberal democratic political systems wouldn't. But it's the direction of where it is taking the people and how sustainable and why. And those are the questions that probably should be important. Now, systems don't change radically, Debarl. You cannot have change overnight, but change also needs to be well guided and directed. Otherwise, it becomes unsustained. And that is what happened with Egypt. You had, what was his name? Sisi? Not what do you call the guy who came? The guy who replaced Morsi. Morsi. Then after that, now you had that. Now that is political Islam that time, in the context of the Muslim Brotherhood and so on, and they felt that now change has come. But before they knew, they were back in Tahrir Square. Now people ask, when is the time to leave Tahrir Square? Now, if you're always in Tahrir Square, then when do you build your country? So there is a lot of important things that people must balance between order and liberty to make the system work. Because for every action, there's a reaction. Remember, the old regime enchant also has got supporters and all that. So it needs a good balance. And what the African Union has done is good to say, the transitional authority that is military, they've suspended the constitution and so on, and probably even declared martial law. But what is important is a good balance, so that the system can change without shocking the entire country and burning it down. Because you see, the demonstration effect of the Arab Spring, for example, in all these other countries, that this is happening, let's do it here, messed up the entire place. And there's not been much change except in the retrogressive direction. So we need to be careful so that we ensure that the Republic of Sudan is able to undergo whatever political change they are going through, probably in the positive sense, but do it in the right way. Otherwise, you can't change a system overnight, but you can put it in the right trajectory. And that is what we want.
All right.
Yeah.
And we know this, Sudan has not been here for the first time. I think this is the 5th coup that we can actually talk about.
Yes, yes.
And what lessons can we learn from the other coups as well? We know that there's a transition, of course, military council that is formed to oversee this particular handover from the military to the civilians. But there are a lot of kinks that needs to be ironed out as far as this transitioning is concerned. It's not going to be smooth, all over. But what lessons can we draw from history as well, as past coups have also, showcased in Sudan, and the lesson that we can draw from them?
Debarl, I'm not sure that you can link to the historical trends of Sudan to what's happening at the moment, although it has relevance in the sense that the issue of transition, as Moma said, in Sudan also plays out. But I think the demonstration effect which he talked about, don't forget that this is happening on the heels of what has just happened in Algeria. And the people who are in the streets were watching what happened in Algeria, where Bouteflika eventually succumbed in. But in the case of Sudan, it is a lot more than that. Because first you see Bashir himself, who came through a coup, tried to bring in democracy. And in the process, he has faltered along the way, a blend of democracy plus kind of strongman doctrine. But he has been presiding over a decaying situation. First of all, he inherited a unitary state. He failed to see signals. If he had read the signals well, Sudan would still be one. But he failed, and so you had a split.
Yes.
South Sudan left. And no king who has seen a country being, destroyed in that manner can sustain such a kingdom. But Sudan is one of those countries, plus Algeria, which survived the Arab Spring. And they survived the Arab Spring because you had all this strong leadership with intelligence leading and all that, but it has come to naught. One of the things that has really broken the back of the camel is the economic aspect. That was the entry point. The people started coming into the streets because of rising prices. And why was that the case? It was coming to the streets because the revenue they were getting from the south dried up. Don't forget that the oil is all from the south, and they were charging, in fact, the price, what they were charging South Sudan for transit of oil to Port Sudan was more than even the oil price itself. And so that revenue dried up. The coffers dried up. They have a war still in Kordofan. They have a war in Darfur. They still have not settled the issues with South Sudan. And you could see the president moved quickly to negotiate a deal for South Sudan. Because then he thought if South Sudan is stable, he will still be getting revenue and he'll sustain his rule. But that time was not on his side. Now, time having eluded him, he then, of course, tried to give in. He started saying, okay, let me listen to people. He went all over the country explaining, saying we are going to make more liberal changes. But I think it was too little, too late. And that's what we said here, that what was offering was too little, too late. Now he's caught. He's out. But people know that they don't want what has happened, say in Egypt, to happen in Sudan. And so they have seen the military move in, nicely to say, okay, we suspend the constitution. And that has brought the people out to say, no, we want complete change. And I think we are going to see a really fight on this issue. But to me, there is also a regional dimension, which is worrying. Don't forget Saudi Arabia has recognized this military regime. And that is in contradiction to what the AU position is.
With the military regime in Sudan?
Yeah, in Sudan.
With the current chair of the Transitional Military Council?
Correct. Because Saudi Arabia has recognized it.
Yes.
And against the AU wish. And actually Saudi Arabia, I mean AU and South Arabia, we had a big challenge on the issue of Yemen. But let me stay with South Sudan, Sudan. Now, that is going to complicate the issue because we know that Saudi Arabia is capable of rolling out resources. And for them, they are perhaps looking at who are the elements in the military. Are they going to be pro, Saudi Arabia, external, expansion, which they are pushing. And that is the danger we now have in the region. And AU position has always been, any unconstitutional change is not welcome. So they are reading from the script of the Constitution Act as enacted in 2001, when they changed this to bring in, send out the military home. But you see, even that has always had a problem. It had a problem, especially in the case of Egypt. When it is a popular uprising, how do you then call it a military? The military has only taken an opportunity of the popular uprising. What the military should have done, in my view, is immediately then to come into coalition with the people, then agree on a transition, and instead of course, they will have to suspend the constitution because the people would not have accepted any order of Bashir to succeed him, and then come up with a workable solution that can meet the demands of international community, including AU, so that they can get out of this. And I think they have now 15 days to correct that situation. If not, they will be suspended, and we don't know what will happen next.
Right. No, Debarl.
Debarl, there is a lot of questions on the wall that are still unanswered with the case of Sudan. The crackdown on protesters continue. The conflict in Darfur, South Kordofan, and Blue Nile still continue. The crime perpetrated by the security against civilians still continue. The restriction on the media still continue. And there is a raft of questions that one has to deal with. One is, where is al-Bashir? Is he holed up in the palace or some chateau somewhere to live the rest of his life in
the last time we checked, he was under house arrest?
Wherever. Was the change of guard a tactical retreat in the face of the uprising of the civilian? Did Bashir build enough center that will hold off during this short term and maybe medium term? And actually, what is the future of Sudan? Is it going to be continuous military control for foreseeable future? Or are they going to march towards some form of Jeffersonian democracy, government of the people, for the people, and by the people? All these questions and the desire of Sudanese, and like everybody else, is to have some sort of freedom on a say about the country. Are the Sudanese going to be happy with whatever short-term solution? I don't think all these things are going to be answered if we look at the case of Libya and look at the case of Algeria right now.
Let's get back to Hassan Khonenje, of course, and we can discuss about, immediately we saw Abdel Ibn Auf, Awad Ibn Auf, who now was the military commander then. Protesters said they were not really comfortable with, the general, because he seemed to be too close to, of course, to Bashir as well. So he will actually perpetrate or continue to perpetuate what now Bashir had for the country. But with the entry of Abdel Fattah Burhan, who many say is apolitical, do you think, as they've promised, that after 2 years, then they'll hand over this country back to civilians, or something else will happen in between? Because this is the same script that played out also in 1985. There was an uprising, and we had, was it Sawad then, who took over? Al-Mahdi, who took over now the transitional military coup. But they hand over to the civilians, smoothly then, that we can say we can learn from history, and history will repeat itself.
There are not too many Obasanjos and Buharis, not just in Africa, but in most of the developing world, who come in as military strongmen, then somehow, pave way for another government that is civilian. Those cases tend to be very few, because the military, they make terrible things rather they're terrible at actually statecraft, especially as far as Bantus politics is concerned. And, to say that it's going to be 2 years, I think all the promises we've had from the militaries generally after an uprising, those who say that they're going to have a transitional government and then they're going to hold elections, a lot of times they succeeded themselves. And of course, we have seen that from Cairo, we have seen that in other places on the continent. So that is not something in the wake of what the Arab Spring and of course in the subsequent revolution that people have seen. I don't think people in Sudan trust that. I don't trust that either. The only thing that can ensure that it's actually continuous pressure and a move towards that transition. Now, remember, for you to come in extra-constitutionally, you have to suspend the constitution itself. And so, under what framework are you being held accountable? Okay, under what law am I going to hold you accountable after 2 years? There is nothing to hold you accountable to. So you're under no obligation yourself to actually even respect our gentleman's agreement. So it's not likely to happen. That is why the military, the moment they test power and politics, they never want to leave. Okay, so under the current circumstances, the only insurance is going to be a move towards a civilian government. Okay, of course, then assisted by regional and the international community. Now, if it's in fact true, as you say, that Saudi Arabia has already recognized, of course we know part of the reason why is because Sudan has been one of the biggest contributors to the war in Yemen when it comes to contributing troops to the alliance or the coalition of the willing in Yemen. And of course they will want them to stay that, not just another aspect, of course, the continuing Cold War within the Gulf countries. You know, having a foothold within the Horn of Africa, or countries are siding with you, I think is important. However, the only guarantee that is going to make sure that actually the military doesn't misbehave when they get into politics the way they always almost do is to make sure that there is a move towards a transitional government that is actually civilian in nature. The transitional period has to be shortened, not by 2 years. 2 years is 2 years too long. Not if you want to avoid implosion in Sudan, that will be the only way. But not with the implosion in Sudan, it is important for us who live in Kenya and this region. It's going to affect all of us. So we have a stake in it, and we must do something about it, either through the international, the regional bodies, or the United Nations, in a way that's actually going to move Sudan closer to a civilian role. It could not be a democracy overnight, because democracy is a process. But at least a move towards that direction, I think, is going to be helpful for all of us and for the people of Sudan.
Okay. I think sure, then we... Just very quickly, Debarl, to just make an adage. In those days of Sadiq al-Mahdi and after, there used to be the late Dr. Hassan al-Turabi. And Dr. Hassan al-Turabi was first criticized for being a prescriber for despotism those years, but it dawned on him that one day change will come, and he had made some prescriptions before he was jailed and later died towards a sort of a midwifing, a process towards a more inclusive, open political system in the context of what is happening in Sudan, that time the Sudan. But it's important that we be careful. Organized protests, they don't organize themselves and just automatically, just like who wants the change? And we cannot talk on behalf of the people of Sudan in the context. So where is the change coming from? Who is driving it? I was very excited last time we had the whole thing that came with Arab Spring. Myself and Professor Matanga, we wrote something, we called it change and so on. And it turned out to be something else that is so regrettable. So what I think what the panelists are pulling towards is diplomatic tact. It is needed. It needs to be led by the regional institutions and the region to take charge to help Sudan to balance out so that they don't descend into any kind of, state failure or, civil war, something like that. That way, the system will hold and change will be incremental, but in the right direction. So that's what we want to make sure happens. Otherwise, there will be a problem, and we don't want that to happen because it will affect the region.
Right. Let's look at what is on the front page of Daily Monitor, because this is also a new development that Uganda will offer asylum to Sudan's al-Bashir. What does it portend for, first of all, this particular case at the ICC, because we saw in 2014 it had to be shelved by Fatou Bensouda, the chief prosecutor, because of lack of cooperation amongst the African states actually to offer Bashir, or for that warrant of arrest to be effective, because many countries, of course, he will step to those countries, but he will not be arrested. But now we have Uganda opening arms also to al-Bashir as well. And the question has been, if you look at the front page of East African, who's next as far as exit is concerned, or toppling of despots is concerned? Let's begin from Dr. Hassan Khamnenje. Yeah, are we going through? Yeah,
we have it.
We have it. Oh, okay. We can begin with you, Erasmus.
A very interesting perspective, because I know that in the past, President Museveni was an avid enemy of Bashir, because it's not a secret that Uganda supported the liberation of South Sudan. And for that, there was quite a bit of tension and war actually between Sudan and Uganda. And in fact, there was very strong allegation by Uganda that Sudan was also in a way supporting the Lord Resistance Army, which eventually went into Central Africa and disappeared. So, well, politics, one day in politics is a long time, and here there is change of heart that Uganda can offer. I guess Uganda is coming from a point of view that in order to solve the problem in Sudan, let's get Bashir out so that the transition, as it says, then it doesn't become a change of guard. But it would be interesting to see, because history has it. For instance, if you look at the story of Taylor, who has since been acquitted, even when he was offered sanctuary in Nigeria, the international community was able to extract him and take him there. So I guess this is really, as I would see it, first steps to try and solve the crisis at hand now, but I don't think it's sustainable that Uganda can be able to keep him for a long time. It will also even strengthen the relationship if indeed the regime that takes over in South Sudan is hostile. I would have thought the best bet for him, because he was very much a proxy of Saudi Arabia, would have been Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia perhaps has got the resources and the grafters to try and protect him, and not Uganda.
Right. Professor Nomidamba.
Debarl, history repeats itself. Egypt once offered the South Iran soft landing, only for Anwar Sadat to be toppled, and the South had no place to go. Saudi Arabia, like ambassador just said, offered the Idi Amin soft landing, and eventually Idi Amin died there. Al-Bashir has to face the world for his crime. He has no place to hide, but has to have justice and be treated appropriately. That's the only thing that must happen.
Okay, we can try and also see what is happening in Sudan and extrapolate that with what is happening in Egypt. Right now we have one falling, but another one seeks extension now to 2013. That is the President Abdel Sisi, Fattah al-Sisi in Egypt. Maybe we could comment on that. Extension of terms, and of course seeking also parliamentary approval as well.
I think that is all the more reason why people in Sudan should be worried. You know, as they say, you know, without really impugning the character of anybody, just saying on this as a side thing, you know, they say that there's no honor among thieves. And just, you know, starting with Sudan, being given asylum in Uganda is not a guarantee that he's not going to be extradited with the ICC. When circumstances and politics change, and perhaps it's in the best interest of Kampala to hand him over, they will. Of course, we know for a very long time they were not friends, especially between Museveni and Bashir. Personally, they were not friends. But increasingly, I think because their interests seem to coincide, especially on South Sudan, and we also know, I think let's not forget that Bashir has actually played a big role in the recent peace process in Sudan and the Central African Republic, which were being held in Khartoum. So with all the chaos and perhaps the suffering that he might have inflicted on people of Sudan, regionally, increasingly of late, he's been able to make certain moves that perhaps leaders such as Museveni are going to consider him, for an asylum. Of course, I don't see that extradition happening anytime really soon. I think part of also the challenge is, Bashir still has a constituency within Sudan that supports him within security and intelligence services. And so managing his departure is something that has to be done very carefully. It's someone who's been in power for 30 years, and he is still alive. He's not been eliminated. He's still there. No, what's happening in Egypt, it's something that was expected, really. Because, first of all, it was supposed to be a short-term caretaker government. And, of course, we know President General Sisi decided to succeed himself. Now he's president, Sisi. Of course, every time someone has a habit of changing goalposts, you expect them to keep changing goalposts when the time comes. I expect the thing to pass unless he decides not to run. I expect him to run again because I don't think there's a lot of political opposition. Most of the political opposition is either in prison, facing a death sentence, or it's been expelled, it's living outside the country. And so that's also, should be a lesson, because the military doesn't do very well when it comes to politics. Now, but it's important to distinguish a little bit between Sudan and Egypt. The military in Egypt, pervades every sphere, economically, name it. It's extremely powerful. It's been powerful since the days of Gamal Abdel Nasser. It did not start today. It has a lot of say within the Egyptian body politic. But in Sudan, it's different. The military in Sudan does not have the resources or the history or the tradition that the Egyptian military, for instance, has within Egypt. And so the cases are different. It can survive in Egypt. It will not survive in Sudan.
Thank you. Right. Let's hear from Monzawas, even as we're winding up on this.
I think countries, so political culture varies from one place to another. But one thing that whatever is happening in Egypt is very important, that is underscoring here, is that is the progression of change, and how once you shock a system or how you try to change it, how you can sustain it thereafter. And it looked very easy when we had Morsi and you remember President Hosni Mubarak in something like a cage, being taken to court and all that, and people said this is it, but it was not. It was not. So very important. Now, I'm very careful about some of these headlines in some of these newspapers. I don't know what that is, but we need to be careful that if someone is running from a house, a burning house, as a human right, you're supposed first to, as a human being, you're supposed to offer them refuge. Even if you catch someone who has done something bad, they must have their day in court, they must be treated humanely and so on. That is very important. Now, over and above just Bashir, it's not all about Bashir, but we are managing a country here. Remember, in transitional justice, we say, how you deal, for example, with the perpetrators can have another big effect on the constituents that supports them.
Thank you.
So it's very important that we be careful first, that we handle the matter in Khartoum first, then the issues of Bashir and so on are matters of transitional justice.
Thank you.
And they will come.
Very briefly also from Ambassador Erastus Buncha, briefly.
I think your question was about Egypt. And my take on it is, at the moment, El-Sisi is enjoying a honeymoon, and for that matter, is very popular. And it's popular because he's been able to turn Egypt around from an economic, almost it was going to be a basket case, but also the security, which he has reinstated. But there is one thing that most of our leaders always forget. There is a saying that the best time for a conductor to leave the stage of an orchestra is when the audience is on his feet, meaning when they have appreciated what they have done. Unfortunately, during that moment is when the best conductors walk out of stage. The music ends, it ends on a high note. But we overstay our welcome. Now, what the steps that Egypt is taking is worrying me from two angles. One, that they have now made exceptional law to say they would allow El-Sisi to go beyond 2030. And as Hassan said, if you can change your word now, you will change it later.
Thank you. Thank you. Finally, Professor Noami Damba.
Debarl, the example of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu has just been elected for the 5th term. And I do not have any problem so long as the change of term is by the people. But in the case of Egypt, and most of the Arab world, has been run by either kings or strongmen. That has been the pattern. Now, are they going to change to the kind of democratic world that we are thinking about? That's a big question. And my my prediction is that LCC will come to an end very similar to what he inherited.
Thank you, our panelists this morning. Naomi Damba, the Vice Chancellor of KCA University and a foreign policy and defense expert. Thank you for coming through. The chairman also of African Capacity Building Foundation, also the chair of TEDBAC East Africa, and the former deputy chair of the African Union. This is Erastus Muncha. Thank you for coming through. Also want to appreciate you, Dr. Momazao, governance and security strategist. Thank you for coming through. And director of the Horn Institute. This is Dr. Hansen Khanenje. Thank you for coming through this morning and also for your contribution on what is happening here in the country and also the affairs. We have also some reactions here on social media, right? We have Adair Kevin saying the military council in Sudan is hoping to repeat occurrences in Zambia and Egypt, but the plot has fallen flat in Algeria. African dictatorships must not be allowed to evolve. Citizens must take their place and shape their destiny. And I have so many of them here, as you can see as well, but because of interest of time, we cannot be able to read them. But also, you can see on screen also some breaking news where the National Land Commission former chair, that is Mohamed Swazuri, and several other ex-officials have been arrested. Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission detectives picked up the officials from their homes in Nairobi on Wednesday morning. The arrest is linked to fraudulent compensation for land acquired by the commission for the construction of a standard gauge railway. So that is the latest so far. And of course, we shall be having also other information trickling into a studio much later in our subsequent bulletins on this developing story as far as the arrest of former chair of the National Lands Commission is concerned. That is Mohamed Swazuri, and also some of the officials of LLC as well. Thank you for your valued company. You've been watching Standing on Guard here on AM Live.